Tech Tips Weekly Review. As always, thank you for sending through the questions. There have been a stream of them this week. I've also been at a number of events, such as the Corporality Summit. So thank you to Priya and the team for having me there. It was wonderful to get out and about, be on stage again. I'll be at a number of events in the coming weeks, so I look forward to catching up with you there. If you have any events you would like to have us attend, feel free to send the comments or direct message me. And I'll happily look into our schedule to be able to accommodate you all. Now, very, very interesting topic. Now, I've got a special guest with me coming in. The big question you've asked around is data, right? So, I mean, that's key and crucial to everything. Understood that. But the next level of the conversation is it's no longer if, it's when. So without further ado, let me introduce Geoff to the call. Thank you for joining me today, Geoff. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kristof, and thanks to the kind of ASE family and crew for having me.
Yeah, no problems, my friend. Now, we have a very important topic today, and one that's really close to my heart, and probably one that you're very, very familiar with, in the fact that it's data is the new oil. Now, when we start talking about this, it's a common misconception around the fact that data has been a subsidiary to the running of the business. What do you see and how do you see data contributing to that and being the vital part of the new organization?
I think for the first time ever, I go to barbecues on the weekends and people talk about data breaches. Yep. Why are they finally talking about data breaches? It's because of the big ones that have hit the news, and it's hit the CISO level and the board level finally, because the rest of the business no longer just think that, oh, the data's somewhere over there and that's an IT problem. It's now a business problem because it's the board, it's the public relations team. They're the ones that have to face the music when that breach happens, right, Kristof?
Yeah. And look, we talk about the genericism of data that gets stolen. The most important ones that we see and the highest, breached, let's call it topics are email addresses, and along with that come passwords. Additional information around people, especially around their demographic and geographical locations, are being released, and of course, names and usernames, right? And so these are the sort of informations that can create a socially generated or engineered profile, and that means by doing that, access to corporate data is becoming more and more obvious. So good point about boards talking about this, and obviously becoming a barbecue topic, which is probably something you and I have talked about often at barbecues for years. But so where do you see the next conversation coming from this then?
I think it's people that, like you touched on it really well there, right? There's a lot of that kind of social interaction happening. People are getting their email addresses, their names all stolen, and obviously passwords are getting leaked there as well. So I think, again, it's the bubbling up of the stuff the boring IT people have been talking about for years. It's making sure that you're using password managers, get back to basics. But those basics across the board are then going to protect something that you've kind of never thought about before, which is protection of the corporate data or your own data.
Now, interestingly enough, we've heard a lot around, how AI is helping cyber criminals get more, educated on how to attack victims, etc. So from that perspective, you're looking at increased ways of annoying people, let's say, to give up certain information. What are the sort of trends? What are the threats that you see are now becoming more and more obvious given the change in the way we work?
Yeah, so I was talking to our Threat Labs team just yesterday, and what they're seeing a lot of now is specific threat actor groups, so specific hacking groups, choosing different ways to go about it. So one will go about and just look for leaked credentials on the web, and then what they might do is, everyone's followed the good advice of ASE and other providers out there to say, turn on 2FA, right? So now that everyone's got 2FA on, that became a bit of a roadblock. But now what they're doing is it's kind of called MFA fatigue. So you might look over to your device and there's loads of these kind of accepts, just keep going with, hey, accept. Eventually what they're hoping is that it's 1 a.m. in the morning, your phone's waking you up, you're in a bit of a bad mood, and you're just going to smack that down and hit accept. The moment you've hit accept, you've given away your keys that you had to whatever that castle may be. And
That's
then from
MFA fatigue, right?
yeah, that's right. That MFA fatigue that you might hear about. And then kind of once they're in, that's it, right? They've got an active account. They could steal access to whatever data you have. And through what we do here, we do lots of risk assessments, and I kind of find out some pretty cool things from these risk assessments. But from the back of that is we find that mostly on average, a staff member on day one to an organization has access to 5 million files.
Okay.
I'm not sure about you. I don't even think I touch 100 files in kind of a week, right?
That's a bit of a scary statistic when you start talking about it, right? Especially as a brand new user, you may well not be aware of the fact that you have access to such a depth and breadth of information, right?
Yeah. And, it's maybe no one's direct fault. Maybe it's, hey, we've acquired businesses and we've added their data in, or we've done a cloud migration, but we've just kind of lifted and shifted and not looked at the permissions along the way. Like, we get to see this across even OneDrive and SharePoint as well, that people have open access across those kind of secure environments.
Well, that leads to a huge gap, right?
Yeah.
So where do we look at? I mean, obviously, I guess as a user's perspective, it's not their job, so to speak, to do this. So what is it we should be aware of, especially in the technology sector, and what are the gaps that we should be mindful of? How do we apply?
I think that you need to have visibility across all your systems and understanding what data you've got in those systems, what kind of sensitivity of it. So kind of even starting to understand and classify your data, that would help you in kind of different ways, right? That would help you for when you get breached eventually, you can quickly turn around to your board or market relations or whoever you need to tell that, we've got 500,000 driver's licenses and 10,000 passports and a whole bunch of BSB and account numbers for the staff that we pay. You can then quickly realize the impact that the breach has had on your organization and externally. But then also making sure that users have somewhere to share and collaborate, right? Kristof, you remember the days where collaboration was bad and everyone would, let's block access to Dropbox and how dare we upload things to the internet, right? Whereas
the classic days of this is, mind you, take that even one step further back, Geoff. This is before Microsoft 365, where OneDrive and SharePoint didn't exist, and so our collaboration tools were at best there, but the ability to secure those was very low.
Absolutely. So we want to make sure that we give the users the tools they need, because God, I'd shoot someone if they took away my collaboration tools, and I'd find a way around it, right? So you want to make sure that we've got the right tools in place, but making sure that it's a safe and secure place for people to do that. So put the right safeguards around the collaboration, making sure that we're not exposing market sensitive information, personally identifiable information, and then making sure that the business has a view on it to make sure that you know what has been shared, you know what's there, and you know your kind of risk profile.
Yeah, look, I mean, we talk about the concept of firstly understanding your data, knowing where it lives, then governing it. And as you said, if you can then identify what that looks like, you can then take profiles and policies in place to be able to secure it better. But that's the key element, right? So knowing the more you know, the more protected and the better you can be at responding. And I guess that's probably one of the biggest parts around this is that it is every 7 minutes a breach occurs in Australia, according to the ASCS, or the Australian Signals Directorate as well. And so as part of that, we are seeing breaches happen all the time, to the point where they've got really publicised last 6 months of 2022. You don't have to look too far to see them. The question is then, not all of these have had to be reported. And I think if you start to look at that, the majority of breaches occur aren't publicly, let's call, recognised, and they're not publicised for good reasons in some instances. But the onus is on the organisation to notify their customers as well as their staff, etc. And that creates obviously a whole raft of what we would call an incident response plan. That's something that key organisations should have. And it's going back to that point. It's not if, it's when. And that's the unfortunate precedent that we're living in today. We need to be prepared. So understanding that, what do you think the kind of programs of work people need to have or plans need to be in place for organizations right now, given the threat landscape we live in?
Well, it's really tricky, right? And I'm not going to say that there's a single silver bullet out there to fix it. Kristof, how could I stop, someone offering you $1 million and giving up your active credentials and signing an MFA request coming through, right? Things like that type of inside threat, that's something to always I think about. I'm like, how would we stop that type of breach? But like you said, it kind of doesn't matter what the breach is. You're going to get breached at some point, and you can definitely put your right controls around of making sure you're up to date from patching, having the right kind of EDR or MDR solution in place as well to help monitor that. And then understanding third-party risk is a big one too. Understanding who's got third-party access to your systems, how are you interacting with them and their systems, and just kind of be breach ready. Be ready to answer those tricky questions for when the breach happens. Know what information the board, the press, or your insurance company is going to need. Tell them what was taken, how the data was obtained, and who it impacts, because then you're going to come out not on top, but as an organization, how much better are you going to look than the ones that take 2-3 weeks, 4 months, and keep updating that count of the kind of hit count as the way they go?
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the suit or lawsuit, I should say, that Medibank are currently facing because they're not actually releasing what kind of data got breached or the depth of it. The public backlash. It's you don't have to get into it. So, I mean, we are talking about being breach ready, right? So at the end of the day, there are a lot of measures we can take. I mean, I speak about this. There's the 3 layers of protection. There's self-defense, where we have education of your staff, know what to look out for, get them aware of what they need to do, think before you click, as I say. Then there's the passive awareness, where you start to implement the lines of protection around a security framework, NIST, ISO, Essential 8, and then finally active defense, where we start to talk about threat protection tools that actively seek out these sort of engagements. So when we start to talk about that, that's all good and well, but then we have that next evolution where we start to talk about being breach ready. So from that perspective, you've talked about how we need to have the information classification. What else do we need to be prepared when we face the music?
Knowing what was touched. So it's one good thing to have, a run sheet of this is the data that we hold as an organization, but understanding how the person obtained that data, is it through a leaky hole? Is it through active credentials that they've got? Because another thing attackers do is they might use, let's say they use my credentials, right? They've used my credentials to get into a network. The first or second thing they're going to do is they're going to look around, and then they're going to go and make another account. They're going to upscale their access. So then you might see that, they came in as Geoff, but making sure that you can kind of follow the bouncing ball to see that, they came in as Geoff, then they've made another account hidden under kind of Lenovo admin or something, right, to hide under the weeds and something that you wouldn't look for. So understanding what they may do. And I think, Kristof, as well, to your point, having people ready in your pocket, having people ready to help you respond and know how to respond to it. I think, years ago, we would all talk about having kind of tabletop exercises to understand what would happen when a breach occurs. And only the top end of town would be doing that. Whereas now I think that's applicable to everyone. You should understand in your business, big or small, 5 seats, 5,000, 500,000 seats, understand how that breach is going to impact you. And you can use that as a tabletop exercise. They don't have to be, the kind of top 4 big engagement type styles. They can be as easy as you need to, but just understand what would happen to the organization. You spoke about it a little bit before there as well. The reputational damage, that's something you can't predict. But I'm sure you would agree, the way we respond to a breach now would depend on that reputation damage down the line, right? You respond well, you notify early, you put your hand up, and sure, you'll cop the fine. And we'll talk a little bit about how the fines are about to get a lot worse. But put your hand up early and just say, yeah, we got breached. This is what happened, and be prepared for when that does happen.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you made, right? I mean, if you're talking about preparations, you talk about tabletop, red team thinking, even just testing your BCP plan. So that's your business continuity plan, your disaster recovery plans. Any organisation needs to start considering, no matter size or scale, about what they're doing with their data and how you can, in the event of a breach, one, recover that data, but two, also then, as you said, notify authorities, because now the next topic that we're going to get into, that nasty one that's come around, right? We've talked about like the last 12 months, it was a slap on the wrist type of engagement. You know, we know you were breached, bad luck. I mean, we've seen the likes of Optus, for example, where they haven't been heavily penalised, but that has woken up, let's call it, the authorities, the governing bodies, and have started to then apply, let's call it, heavy fines now around these sort of breaches. Talk us around that.
Yeah, I was actually fortunate enough to be at an event 2 weeks ago where the Privacy Commissioner got up and spoke about their kind of what they're looking at now, how they're reviewing it, and what they're thinking that might come into play. They've even taken public opinion. You could have written in yourself, and I know a lot of the kind of industry bodies have put together papers on behalf of the members to write in and talk about the impacts to privacy, the impacts to an organisation that's been breached. And the one thing that we don't talk about often enough is the protection to the people that have been breached. You know, what's the corporate going to do to protect you and me, Kristof, when our driver's license, date of birth, or my public identifiable information has been leaked?
Yeah, look, and that in itself is a completely a different type of conversation. In fact, there's an interesting website. It's so Pwned, as we like to refer to it. It's a tech term, right? It started from World of Warcraft, where the designer accidentally misspelt Pwned instead of owned. There's actually now a website developed by an amazing gentleman out of Brisbane. His name is Tony. And so Tony created a website saying, haveibeenpwned.com. And that's an interesting one where we, as top tips, I'd like to share with everyone, you're welcome to go to that website, type in your email address, and no, it won't take it to the dark web. But what it will do is, using the database of information it's gathered across the web, notify you about potential breaches that your data has been breached in and what kind of information was being breached. So that's one step as a user and an individual that you can take to make sure that you're being more aware and alert of your data being out there. Now, the other thing about that is that we should often use good, let's call it corporate hygiene. You know, obviously you've talked about knowing the data, being able to access it, but as individuals, we need to start taking our own steps to make sure, password managers are great, but if you don't have access to one or you don't choose one, you may have to use high levels of hygiene with your passwords. Now, we're not talking about putting a 1, 2, 3 exclamation mark and an @ sign after a password. That is not what we call good password hygiene. For more information about that, feel free to reach out to myself and Geoff, and definitely go into that a bit further. Now, Geoff, unfortunately, we're running low on time after this. As I like to ask, what is the best gold nugget of information you think that our audience should have?
Do a risk assessment on your data. Understand what data you've got in your organization, and speak to your trusted advisors like ASC to help you then work out what data do we need to keep, how can we control our data, how can we control our overexposure, and think about a term called a blast radius. Think about, if you were impacted tomorrow, what that means to you. How many files or folders could be ransomed, so encrypted and held at ransom, or how many files and folders could be exfiltrated, so copied out of your organization. They are two wildly different numbers and can impact your organization massively.
That's a huge gold nugget. So thank you for sharing that, Geoff. Really appreciate you joining the call and the video today. Now, as always, everyone, Geoff has been tagged in the above. So if you have any questions, feel free to connect with him. Share your comments below. We will address those in the coming hours. I realize that as a live video, it takes a while to process, but we will answer those as soon as possible. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to comment or to share them or direct message either Geoff or myself, and we will get back to you with as many answers as we can. Now, in the meantime, Geoff, can anyone else find you other than on LinkedIn?
Yeah, you can stalk me through LinkedIn, or you can come and find me at our company website as well. So I work for a company called Veronis, so come and find me there. Or maybe you can even run into Kristof and I at the next event that we're at as well.
Mate, I look forward to those events, especially when it comes to industry tech talks and leadership thoughts. So thanks you again for joining me. As I always like to say to everyone, please think before you click. The boogeyman is definitely out there, more so now than ever. And until next week, have a fantastic weekend, especially in Sydney here. It'll be a great sunny weekend, Geoff. I think we might have the option to even go outside this week. So in the meantime, be safe, be well, and I'll see you all next week. Goodbye.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Bye now.